Jovan, Buha! Buha!
Yo, yo. I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to another Lakers postgame reaction show. I just got back from my hotel bed because I am here in New York. I did not make the trip to Washington. I watched the game on League Pass, and the Lakers won 134-96 to improve to 27-19 to 3-1 on the Grammy trip. They have now won 7 of 9 games. They are just a half game back from Denver for the number 4 seed. And they won the first game without Anthony Davis. They had their largest margin of victory. The second time they have set their largest margin of victory this season against the Washington Wizards, which just shows you Washington now lost 16 straight games for the second time this season. Shout out to everybody in the chat right now. Britton, who is first, Kevin Cambridge, Justine, Sam, Hamim, Harry, Jay Lakers, Michael, Prod by 2-6. I think I give Sam a shout out already. Angelco, Hen, D'Lo, Strongest Soldier, all of you shout out in the chat right now. So we got a lot to touch on. I'm going to keep this one relatively brief in terms of game analysis. I want to get into the Q&A as quickly as possible. And I mean, again, not much to talk about today. Not much to take away from a win over the Wizards, though. All things considered, I thought a really good win for the Lakers. No AD, no Gabe Vincent, no DFS, and they just destroyed, eviscerated, crushed, whatever verb you want to use. That's what they did to Washington tonight. But before we get started with our overarching takeaway, 3 takeaways and stat of the night, you guys know the drill. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. All right, so the overarching takeaway for me tonight was this was an impressive win within the context of, as I just mentioned, no AD. Gabe continues to be out. DFS is a late scratch with a shoulder contusion. And so LA, as JJ said after the game, was without 3 of their top 7 guys. I think you could argue, depending on how you want to rank the guys, but basically 3 of their top 7. And yes, Washington is maybe the worst team I've ever seen in my life. I know that's hyperbole, but they're in the conversation. They're certainly one of the 5 worst teams I've ever seen since covering basketball. Like this is just a basketball wasteland. Like there are guys I like individually, but the collective is, so some teams are the collective is greater than the sum of its parts. This is the collective is lesser than the sum of its parts, and just not a good basketball team. But with the context of not having Gabe, not having DFS, not having AD, those are not only 3 of the Lakers' top 7 guys, but also 3 of their better defenders. I mean, I think you can make the case 3 of their top 5 defenders, right? Depending on where you want to slot Gabe in that ranking. So against a team that had lost 15 in a row, they're at home. Remember, going back to the game in LA, it was actually a relatively close game late into the third quarter. I think Washington got it to about like 8 or 9 at one point, and then LA stretched the lead out into, they ended up winning that game by 23 in the fourth. But this, like on paper, could have been a game that was a bit of an emotional letdown coming off the Philly game, no AD, and instead, this was like as serious as the Lakers have been in a game all season or in that conversation. Like, of course, that there's been, I think like the Miami game and some of they've had some nice wins lately that but like this one was from start to finish, like this was a business trip for them to Washington. And I just felt like they took care of business early. There was no playing with their food. There was no like, we're not going to really try until it kind of coast for 3 quarters and then put our foot down in the fourth. This was like, we're going to stomp them early and we are going to just continue. Like there was no mercy in this one, right? So LA again improves to 27-19, 3-1 on the Grammy trip, wins the first game without AD in convincing fashion. And through that lens, of course, beating Washington, it's beating Washington. They're again, I think, a bottom 5 team I've seen in my life. Like this is just, there's really not many redeeming qualities about that group of players. But I'm being a little harsh right now, but it's just, they're really bad. I'm gonna move on because we touched on enough from this game in that context. Stat of the night to me was a season high 37 fast break points for the Lakers. And the crazy thing with this, and this just shows you the state of Washington's defense. Lakers only had 9 steals. Like to have 37 fast break points, you would think it was like a steal party, and they would have 15, 16, 17 steals, something crazy like that. It was only 9 steals, which is like a higher number, but not like a crazy number, and only 13 Washington turnovers. So despite having only 13 turnovers, they gave up 37 points in transition. So LA was just living in transition, and they did a really good job of a bunch of hit-ahead passes. I think there was a little bit of cherry picking, but you could do that against a bad team like Washington, and they just did a really good job of pushing the pace, playing with a certain level of verve, and just getting out in transition a lot, in a way that got them a lot of easy baskets, and I think contributed to ultimately it being such a convincing win. And then takeaway number 1 for me is the new center rotation. So this was our first look at what this group is going to look like over the next week or so without Anthony Davis. Before the game, JJ Redick said that he doesn't think this is a long-term injury. He thinks that Anthony Davis will be back hopefully next week. So it could maybe end up being just the 8 days and 4 games into the trade deadline. Maybe he plays by the end of the week on Saturday against the Pacers. But JJ seemed to indicate this is a shorter term injury, and he's confident that AD will be back at some point next week. We'll see. With the Lakers injury situations, it's always we'll see. But with AD out, Jackson Hayes gets the start, which we knew what was going to happen, but was confirmed today at shoot around. And Jackson played, I think, arguably his best game of the season. I think one of his best games as a Laker. 10 points, 10 rebounds, 3 blocks. There were stretches out there. He looked like Tyson Chandler and DeAndre Jordan in their primes. Like just, I mean, we know about the aerial ability, the lob threat, but just dunking and blocking shots and skying in for rebounds. And I think that, again, speaks more to Washington and Jonas Valanciunas and just the matchup, but got to give Jackson credit for the way that he played. Eventually got into foul trouble later, finished with 4 fouls, and I think had like 2 or 3 within a few minutes there in the third quarter. But for the most part, stayed out of foul trouble, at least in the first half when the game was still being determined. And then once it was pretty much over, he racked up some fouls, and then actually had to play late because Trey Jemison fouled out and Dalton Connect got ejected, and the Lakers were down so many bodies that Jackson had to go back in. So LA, with this matchup and it being a inferior team, I wasn't sure how they were going to handle it in terms of going big versus going small, but they went big with at least one center out there for all but 41 seconds. They closed the first half. The first quarter with they subbed out Trey Jemison, put Rui in, and went Rui. I think it was Rui, Vando, LeBron to close out the first quarter. But otherwise, it was either Jackson Hayes at center, Trey Jemison, which was a surprise. He got the nod over Christian Koloko, and then later in the fourth quarter, Koloko. Trey Jemison is just a beast. I thought defensively, he had a couple blocks. I thought on defensive glass did a good job. He's just a big physical presence in there. Offensively, at an offensive foul, just taking a dribble and knocking a guy over, and almost got into it with Champagny and Champagne. His name gives me trouble for some reason. But he was fine. For this matchup, he was fine. I don't think should be playing rotation minutes against the Knicks or the Clippers, but that's also kind of the state of where the Lakers are at. I was pretty surprised Christian Koloko didn't play I made the case in my AD video injury reaction on Buha's block that I thought he should start over Jackson. Obviously, Jackson outplayed him tonight and was the better option. So maybe I'm wrong on that, but I think between Christian Koloko and Trey Jemison, like Christian Koloko's been much better. Like I don't think it's been close up to this point. So I don't know if that was a matchup thing. JJ was not asked about it after the game, but I don't know if it was like a matchup thing with Rashawn Holmes being the backup center with no Alex Sarr and JJ just wanting like a bigger body. I don't know if Christian Koloko did something and fell out of favor temporarily or whatever, but like it was kind of odd to me that he didn't at least get the backup 5 minutes until garbage time. But this kind of went about as expected for this matchup. Like I do think Jackson Hayes played really well, and again, like finish it with 4 fouls, but I don't think that was emblematic of his defensive performance. So for one game against this opponent, LA survived without Anthony Davis. They were fine on the defensive glass and rim protection and all that stuff. It gets much tougher against the New York Knicks on Saturday and against the Clippers on Tuesday. We'll see how those two matchups go, but for now, they passed the first test without AD. Takeaway number 2 for me is the collective steps up. And one of the things that I mentioned in my video, the last episode of Buha's block, was Lakers needed guys to step up offensively. Like they needed guys to step up in general, but AD accounts for nearly a quarter of their offense. And that's a big blow. Like defensively, it's already an enormous ask to have Jackson Hayes, Jemison, Christian Koloko, Vando, these guys step up and defend the rim, defend the glass, all that stuff. But offensively, they needed guys to step up. And tonight, LeBron had 24 points, 11 assists. He did LeBron things, just incredible playmaking out there. Felt like he set a season high for like passes kicked for some reason. I felt like 4 or 5 of his passes were kicked tonight, but 0 turnovers for LeBron. So 11 assists, 0 turnovers, an incredible assist to turnover ratio. Austin had 17 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists. So those two guys were about as expected, but Rui really stepped up, had an awesome game with no DFS, no AD. They really needed him to step up. He had 22 points on 9 of 12 shooting, 4 of 5 on threes. Jackson, as aforementioned, Max Christie had 13 points, did a really good job against Jordan Poole, held him to 5 of 15 shooting as the primary defender. Shake Milton, a deserved shout out to Shake Milton, a guy who had been last on the team in plus minus since arriving. The Lakers had just been obliterated in these Shake Milton minutes up to this point. And he comes in, has a plus 25, plus minus, the third best mark on the team behind LeBron, behind Jackson Hayes. He drops a season high, at least with the Lakers, 21 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals, 7 of 8 shooting, 1 for 2 on threes, gets to the free throw line, 6 of 6. He was dominating in the middle of the floor with getting to the rim, with those little pull-ups and step backs and just really thriving in the mid-range. Shake Milton, like by far his best performance as a Laker. It wasn't just Shake though. Like, Brody came in, got the Ed Wood late, but Vando I thought looked much more like himself. 4 points, 7 rebounds, 2 assists, 4 steals for Vando. Did a really good job, point of attack, playing passing lanes, being disruptive. Jemison, as aforementioned, 4 points, 5 rebounds, 2 blocks, fouled out in 18 minutes. Koloko came in, just only played 7 minutes. Dalton got ejected late, but had 10 points in his 22 minutes. And I'm pretty sure that covers everybody. So just overall, like I think Rui's shot making and his aggression and his assertiveness, like this was when Rui's on, he's on. Like we know that at this point. And I thought he did a really good job. And I'm sure there's an extra element here for him of going back to Washington and playing his former team. But he was awesome. Jackson, Max, Vando, Shake, like those guys, I think in particular were really stepped up tonight. So that's where like I thought, even within the context of again how bad Washington is, how bad their defense is, how just unserious of a group they are, there's a lot to like with the individual performances from the Lakers, and a lot of guys stepped up and played some of their better games of the season, some of their better performances recently. And I think that was notable. And then third and final takeaway before we get into the Q&A is Jonas Valanciunas, like just not a second audition that went maybe, I would say not even maybe, it went worse than the first audition. Tonight he starts with no Alex Sarr. He plays 18 minutes, 5 points, 1 of 8 shooting, misses a 3-pointer, 3 for 3 from the free throw line, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, 1 turnover, 2 fouls. Wizards were outscored by 24 points in his 18 minutes, which was the tied for third worst mark on the team. Just did not go well for Jonas Valanciunas. So I think, honestly, at this point, I know it's only 2 games and it's against the Lakers in particular, but like just based on his skill set, I think for what the Lakers need, is he better than Trey Jemison? Yes. Could he do what Jackson Hayes did tonight? Like, no. Like he's not the lob threat. Could he finish open dunks and layups? Yes. Could he protect the rim and rebounding? He's a better rebounder than Jackson, but I think like the defensive mobility and the performance Jackson had tonight, I don't want to say Valanciunas is entirely incapable of doing that, but defensively he just does not have it. And it as I've said before, it kind of feels like he has cinder blocks on his shoes sometimes. So I think if Jonas Valanciunas is the Lakers' best option, I think that they have to go to their second best option, whoever that is, because I do not think he is the answer for them on the center market. So I would say a much higher, or find a bargain player who you can flip a minimum guy for with a second or 2 and get that player. Like I'd much rather have like a Day'Ron Sharpe than a Jonas Valanciunas if I'm the Lakers. But with all that said, let's get into the Q&A. This is one of my faster opening sequences of the season, just because not a lot to touch on with the Wizards. First one from Shibugan. Thank you for the super chat. I underestimated how truly awful the Wizards are. As did I. Like I thought that this was going to be a relatively competitive game through the first like 3 quarters. I thought maybe LA would have like a 8 to 12 point lead, maybe upwards of 15. And then Washington goes on like a little mini run to give them a little bit of a scare. And then they put it away in the 4th quarter. I was wrong. And look, 3rd game in 4 nights for LA, like they had legitimate reasons to not have energy tonight, to not have, like we've seen at times that they have a really good record against below 500 teams, but they don't always take them seriously. And tonight, like it could have been like the Brooklyn game, basically, right? And tonight, they took care of business from start to finish and really just compounded on the start and ballooned the lead. And I think there was a stretch where Washington got it to like, I want to say like 24, 26, and then LA came right back, went on a run and got it back up into the high 30s. So I think the garbage time guys in the 4th that deserve credit for their performance as well. Shibugan again, thank you for the super chat. How in the world do the Wizards front office think that they're going to get a first for JV? He was god awful against our hilarious 5 rotation. Yeah, I mean, I think they're lucky to get 2 seconds at this point for him. And honestly, if I'm the Lakers, like, why would I give up Gabe Vincent and additional draft capital for Jonas Valanciunas? Like, I think Gabe Vincent helps the Lakers more than Jonas Valanciunas does. And the one thing with Gabe that, not for the Jonas situation specifically, but just like the trade kind of next like week or so, is this knee situation. Like it's not great. I believe it is the same knee he had knee surgery on, and knee effusion is something, or knee contusion and effusion are things he's dealt with in the past with his knees. So a little bit of a red flag there. I mean, JJ said he was expecting to have him back at some point on the trip. There's 2 more games left, technically. Really 1 on the road and then 1 back in LA against the Clippers. But we'll see if he can. JJ said he's not sure yet if he can play Saturday against New York. And I just think that's something to monitor as the Lakers have to make some pivotal decisions over the next week. Is just like, what's the status of Gabe? And for as well as he's played lately, can you rely on him to be available? Like availability is a skill. And it's something that he's really struggled with going on, his 2 years with the Lakers now. So obviously been much better this year from an availability standpoint than last year, but continues to be nicked up and deal with these knee issues that I think for me that gives me a bit of pause in terms of like moving forward and just saying like, hey, Gabe Vincent's the third guard on this team. Like, I think if there's a way to maybe upgrade that, I think the Lakers have to look at that. Next one from H_NGM_N. Thank you for the super chat. Thoughts on Capella? Jalen Johnson just went down for the Hawks. Rui could be a Band-Aid. I like Capella. So those of you know, I've been teasing this for a couple weeks now. I have my trade targets list officially coming out tomorrow. I'm going to did some graphics for it, and we'll have that stuff. So recording in the morning, and not to spoil the list, but Clint Capella is on the list. He is someone that, going back to earlier, I want to say in the offseason, but when I did a mailbag, someone asked me like among the potential realistic centers that could be available, who would you like for the Lakers to go get? And I went through each roster, each team's cap sheet, just to kind of like cross reference that to determine who I thought could be available. And I believe the first guy on my list was Walker Kessler, and the second guy on my list was Clint Capella. And spoiler alert, he's not going to be that high on my trade target list, but among real like that, and that was in the offseason, that was before the season started. I think it was like shortly before the season started, but he has regressed a little bit in terms of his finishing. Like he's 31. He's not quite as remember just the prime days with James Harden and even with Trae Young, just his finishing ability and being a lob threat, being a guy who could collect dump off passes and dunk. He's still like a relatively good finisher, but he's not quite as spry and athletic and explosive as he used to be. That said, he's one of the best offensive rebounders in the league. He led the league in offensive rebounding last year. He is one of the better defensive rebounders, just period. On like a per possession, per minute basis, he's still up there in terms of like double guys, of just like what you want from that type of big. And the rim protection has similarly slipped a little bit, but he's still a pretty good drop coverage big. You don't have the same mobility and versatility that he used to have earlier in his career as like a 6'10", 6'11" guy with like relatively good mobility. But so I think he is more suited for a backup role. He is overpaid at about 22, I want to say 22.3 million. So he is making a little bit more than I think ideally you'd pay for that type of guy. But to your point, if you could get him for Rui, that gives Atlanta another forward to slot in there, and like can you throw in JHS and Christian Wood and maybe a couple seconds, and does that get that trade done? Like I do think for LA to get anyone that's really worth being in like their top 8 or even top 9, they're probably gonna have to give up both seconds. Like I don't see any realistic trade out there where they're not giving up both seconds. So if that's the price for Capella, I'd be interested. I think if it's a first, I think that's too much for him. But I do like him. He is in my top 10 trade targets, and I think he would be a good fit as I don't view him as like a starter. I view him more as like a 15, maybe 15 is too low, but like 18 to 22 minute a night guy where he can man the second unit when AD's off the floor. And then I think they could play together a little bit kind of similar to how much AD has played with Jackson. I don't see him as like let's change the start. Like, I don't think he's better than Dorian. I don't think, frankly, like comparing him to Rui, like I think he's like slightly better, but I think he fits the need, obviously. Like I think that the gap between Lakers have other guys who could step into the Rui role, right? With DFS and Vando, Max could even slot up. You could slot LeBron down in bigger lineups. They don't have anyone to slot into the backup center spot right now. Like Jackson Hayes, again, played well tonight, but it was the Wizards. I want to see him play like this against the Knicks, against the Clippers, and then that maybe changes my perspective a little bit. But even then, we have a bigger sample size with Jackson, like being a below average backup center up to this point. So hope that answers the Clint Capella question. Diego Cardona, thank you for the super chat. More likely trade target Time Lord or Clint Capella. Also asked ChatGPT how to save the Wizards, and my computer exploded. I hope you are okay. I hope there's no shrapnel with that explosion because that's ChatGPT cannot save the Wizards. But in all seriousness, I think Time Lord is the more. So I'll frame it this way. I think Clint Capella is easier to get probably. I think Time Lord is more likely. I think he fits more of what LA needs. And I mean, you could maybe argue that with the center situation that they have there, that in his injury history, like maybe the price drops to maybe it's 2 seconds. Lakers are a little limited because I don't think their 2 seconds have a lot of value, but I would say Time Lord is more likely also because there's a chance that Atlanta just looks at it and says, like, we are a team trying to make the playoffs and be competitive. Like, we don't want to just give up on Clint Capella. Like, yes, they recently moved him to the bench, and Onyeka Okongwu is playing really well, but I don't know if they want to just give up. It's a similar thing with Miles Turner, honestly, too, where it's like, I think those teams want another center back if they are giving up their center. And it doesn't even have to be the centerpiece of the trade, but I think they want someone that can at least play that position. They don't want to just like punt on it and have this giant hole there. So I think between Portland is tanking. They have Donovan Clingan. They have DeAndre Ayton. They don't need Robert Williams. He's far more a luxury than a necessity, where you could argue Clint Capella and Miles Turner are both necessities to their current teams with their current ambitions. So I would say between the two, Time Lord is more realistic, though the price is probably going to be higher than Clint Capella. But I think he's a better fit on like a per minute basis. Dude's averaging like 1 million blocks. Like he's watching the Robert Williams film he's a defensive freak, and he's not quite the same level of athlete he was in like Boston. But I think he would add a totally different dynamic to LA's defense. Eeg, thank you for the super chat. Stein reporting LAL has zero intention of parting with AR for Fox, which is why LA hasn't been a listed destination. Who do they think AR is? So, a lot here. So, I mean, I think Fox obviously would be a great addition for the Lakers, and we've had this conversation to varying degrees at various points over the past few months. One tricky thing is getting to the salary, because even let's say they are willing to put AR on the table, you still have he's only making like just under 13 million. Fox is in the mid 30s. I think he's like 34, 35. So you got to add another 23-ish million. And there's no like clean way to get there. It's either Rui plus a couple minimum guys. So now you're trading 4 guys for 1. And Sacramento has to figure out, is Austin and Rui and 2 first-round picks enough for De'Aaron Fox? I would assume not for them. I would assume they would have higher ambitions. And especially if you look at what San Antonio, they could throw in more picks. They can add a guy like Devin Vassell, and they could even throw it. Like, I don't think that they want to trade Castle. Obviously, if you put Castle and Vassell, that trumps the Lakers offer. But depending on like who they want to put in that trade, San Antonio could outbid them. Houston can outbid them. OKC could too, but I don't see them getting in this. And then Miami is an interesting one, I guess. And I'm trying to think of other potential suitors, but I hadn't heard that. I just heard that Fox, like for whatever reason, LA was not on his list. So I don't hear everything. So I'm not going to refute Stein's reporting, and Stein's very plugged in there, just in general. But in terms of giving up Austin, I mean, we've talked about it before. Like their bar for trading Austin has basically been like a top 20, if not like top 15 guy. You can make the case Fox is in that conversation. Excuse me. Sore throat. Give me 1 second for a water break. You can make the argument that Fox is worth that, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree. But I think you also like. I would also argue though, if you look at the way Austin's been playing, like Austin now versus even Austin a month ago, 2 months ago, like he's at a totally different level in terms of his production. Like we've had the debate of can Austin be the number 3 guy? And I think he's been a legit number 3 now for over a month. And we'll see ultimately, like you could argue LA doesn't have the number, like the ideal number 4 through 8 to pair with their top 3. And I think that is ultimately where they are right now, is like they need better players behind the top 3. But I don't even know if they put Austin on the table. Like to the point of the question, I think if they put Austin on the table, you can get in the conversation, but I still think they ultimately get outbid because San Antonio is his top destination. And we see with star players, it doesn't always work out, but he is a clutch client. Clutch situations have tended to work out for their clients. And I think there's been enough buzz with San Antonio and Houston that ultimately I would just favor those situations. So it could also, like, there could be an element here too of, my throat is killing me right now. They like, it doesn't, if you don't think you have a legit shot at Fox, saying that you like, okay, so let's say the report is LA is willing to put Austin Reeves on the table, and then you don't get De'Aaron Fox. How does that make Austin feel, especially when he has one more year left, when he can opt out and be a free agent and potentially sign elsewhere? Like, I think for LA, that there's also a strategic element of, it doesn't really help to say we're willing to give up Austin. Like, if it really came down to it, and if De'Aaron Fox came out and said, LA is my top destination, I want to be a Laker, or that was the reporting that came out, I think LA would strongly consider it. But it doesn't really, like, it doesn't do anyone any favors, other than, I guess, appeasing the fan base to some extent of that they're going for it, trying to get Fox. But clearly they've had a high bar for trading Austin. I've said that on here. I've reported it numerous times. And sometimes people think I'm just like blowing smoke about it. And if this is really true and they would not give him up for Fox, that clearly shows how high they think of him. But I think it might, I think there's a lot of factors here of Austin's been playing better. I don't think Fox has them high on his list or as high as they would like. And then I also think there's a political element of, like, there's really no point to saying you want to trade Austin and then not get Fox and then just potentially ruffle his feathers for no reason. Shabugan, thank you for the super chat. You answered this before, but more time has passed. What's more likely, Lakers giving up a first or not trading at all? I would say giving up a first then is more likely than not trading. I do think they're going to trade. I still think I would put it, if I was ranking most to least likely outcomes, I would put it seconds first, first round pick second, both first, third, no trade fourth. I would be very surprised if the Lakers don't make a trade. I think it would be, I mean, you guys would know better than me, but I feel like the fan base would revolt. I think there's like no way that the Lakers cannot make a trade. So now I think there's a chance they make a small trade and the fan base also revolts in the other direction, being upset about the magnitude of the trade. But I would still peg it as like some type of second round centric. Maybe like one thing I feel like people don't talk about enough is they have those first round pick swaps that are not as valuable as a first round pick, but are more valuable than like nothing. So they almost are like equivalent to second round value. So could you give up 2 seconds and a 20-30 swap for Bruce Brown or something like that, where you don't give up the first, but you do give them the swap option in like 20-30. That could be a possibility. So I would to summarize it, I would still say, like, a second or a protected first are probably like the most realistic paths forward. An unprotected first plus more, or even upwards of two firsts, I think is far less likely. But I still think overall, one of those paths is more likely than not making a trade. Because again, I think I don't think AD coming out and saying what he said made it so that they're just going to go all in and trade both firsts. But I do think it put a level of pressure of like, if they don't trade for a center and they don't do anything, it's really going to be hard optically to like defend that. And I know they've defended it in the past and had their justifications of like, what they did or didn't do. But I think at this point, this is such a critical trade deadline for them that I think they're going to do something. It's just a matter of the magnitude. And for now, I still trend small to medium move, not the big swing. IS, thank you for the super chat. I think Braun and AD see the West as wide open, which is why they're crying out for more help. I agree and would hate for Rob to take this for granted. I agree too. I think outside of OKC, you could argue the Lakers could beat anybody in the West. And I mean, even in OKC, I could see a path. I do think people, because they're young, because we haven't seen it yet, like this tends to be a thing sometimes where I'm a big, like, I believe in record and net rating and like historical comparisons. And OKC is profiling as like an all-time great team right now. And I know that sounds weird to a lot of people. I don't think they're like an all-time great team, but I do think that they are on their own tier in the Western Conference. I think they're clearly the best team in the West, and I think they should be favored to come out of the West. And I feel like they're kind of an afterthought. Like people say the West is wide open, and then they'll throw in like OKC's like probably the favorite, or like OKC's pretty good though, and it's always like this qualifier. And I'm just like, no, OKC is like they have two All-Stars, which Lakers have two All-Stars as well, but they have two of the better defensive centers in the league, and Isaiah Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren. They have a bunch of two-way wings and guards who can all shoot, who can all defend. They can switch. They're quick. They can go big. They can go small. They can even go big and small within their guard and wing rotation. Like you have defense, you have shooting, you have really the like. I think there's an element of Chet's injured. Like, how is he going to look when he comes back? And Jalen Williams is still relatively unproven. But Chet's a top. Shea's a top 5 guy. I mean, he's arguably the MVP favorite right now. I think it's between him and Jokic. And like, they're a legit team. So I would say OKC, to me, I put in their own tier. And like, for now, I'm treating them as like the clear favorite in the West. However, Lakers have matched up well with Houston through the years, or really, past a year and a half as like this iteration of Houston. They've taken a leap. They do pose some trouble for the Lakers with their athleticism, with the speed, and like Amen Thompson is taking a leap and looking like a future star, if not growing into a current star. Jalen Green has been playing better. Şengün just made the All-Star team. And they also have a lot of assets, a lot of flexibility to make a big trade if they so choose. They could trade for De'Aaron Fox. They could trade for Jimmy Butler if they really want to. So they have they have the assets to go out and improve that roster. Memphis, I think, is just a great matchup for LA. We've seen it going back to the 2023 playoffs through the years. They fare well against Ja. Jaren Jackson does not bother AD. And you got the kind of the beef between go back a few years with LeBron and Bane and that whole thing. So like, I just think I know Memphis is good, but I don't think the Lakers are afraid of them. And I think LA, I would pick them to beat the Grizzlies in a first round series. Denver is still the wild card here, where like until the Lakers beat Denver and not just beat them once in the playoffs, like I would like to see them beat them a couple times in the regular season for me to think they have a shot. Until then, I do think look at Sacramento, right? Like LA had they had lost over the past 2 years. They were 1-7 against Sacramento. They beat them early in the season, and then they end up sweeping the season series. With Denver, it's been the opposite, where like they did finally get the win in the playoffs, but they lost again. They got steamrolled in that first matchup, and then they're going to play them 3 times in the next month, starting in late February. So that's going to be, early February. That's going to be late, but that's going to be to me like a big barometer as to like how LA just matches up with Denver. And then you get to the Clippers. I think they're pretty good, but you got questions with Kawhi. The Suns have imploded. Timberwolves have been playing better. Dallas is super banged up. So like just looking at the West, I think to your point, like LeBron and AD, look at it. They're not afraid of anybody. I would say the one team they might be slightly afraid of, and afraid is like a strong word, but I don't think they love playing Denver, and that might be it. And like Jokic does give them problems, but outside of that, last year there was a player in the locker room that said like the only 2 teams we have like any concern with are Denver and Sacramento. And I think that they clearly slayed the Sacramento situation, but the Denver situation still looms. So until they beat Denver consistently in the regular season, I would put Denver up there in terms of like teams that give them trouble, but it might just be OKC and Denver. And if you look at it through that lens, that's more reason to go for it. Arthur Johnson, thank you for the super chat. What kind of padlocked doghouse is Cam in? No PT at all. If you notice, they put Max in a blowout before giving Camps a run. That was shocking. And I might be a question to pose to JJ. I don't know if I want to use my one pregame question on that, but maybe off to the side or kind of figuring that out, because I do think the whole Cam situation has been interesting of just how much he's been in the doghouse since that San Antonio game. And him even, I mean, he was in the doghouse to the point where tonight, obviously this was the case, but even more recently, like Shake got, an opportunity over him. Then Bronny got an opportunity ahead of Shake and Cam. So like that just showed you how deep in the doghouse he was. And then tonight, to your point, he's the only guy who doesn't play. So I don't know if he's dealing with an injury. I don't know if he was like sometimes there's stuff where guys are late to practice or a team meeting or the plane or whatever, and there's like a quiet kind of penalty that we don't know about. To my knowledge, to be clear, that has not happened. I'm just throwing that out there as like speculating as to like what could have happened, because it doesn't really make sense that, to your point, that you had Dalton get ejected, you had Trey Jemison foul out, and they still were going back to other guys in the rotation rather than Cam instead of just letting him play. So sometimes they will, like, if it's so late in a blowout, you don't want to like, there's almost like a pride element where you don't want to just throw the guy in there, and you're kind of like, okay, you didn't play tonight, so we're not going to make you play the kind of like pity final 3 minutes of the game. Maybe there's an element of that, but it's still weird that he didn't like, in theory, he should have started the fourth quarter or at some point in the middle of the fourth with that group. And the fact that he didn't, it's really interesting. I don't quite get it. Eeg, thank you for the super chat. Might be if repetitive, but do you have info on Miles Turner? I love Miles Turner, AD LeBron with Miles Turner shooting. Every real identity of being huge, changes Denver. Matchup equation creates real problems versus others. No update. It's been interesting to see how the Miles Turner trade talks have changed since my report, and I feel like it would have come out at some point, but I to my knowledge was the first person to report that I was hearing that he was potentially going to be available, and not even in a Lakers context, just in like we're coming up on a couple weeks before the deadline, and Indiana has a decision to make with Miles Turner, and there could be a gap there in between what he wants and what they want to offer him, and they've shopped him in the past. So there could be a situation here where they quietly start shopping him before the deadline. And then ESPN started talking about it a lot. Mark Stein has reported on it, and LA Times just reported on it or talked about it. So it feels like it's become a talking point, and that's something that's really emerged. My understanding, again, kind of reiterating a lot of what I've said, has just been Indiana's still evaluating the situation. I think they probably want to be blown away by an offer. I think that would probably have to be something close to 2 first-round picks or the equivalent value. Could you get there with Rui, Dalton, and a first? Could you get there with Rui, JHS, a first and a swap? Rui, JHS, a first and 2 seconds, something like that. Maybe that is enough for them. The other complicating factor here, though, and this is something that I have since heard, and I know Stein reported on this, is that they do want a center back. And I talked about that earlier in the show because they already went out and traded for Thomas Bryant. Remember, that was the first trade of trade season because they were decimated with injuries at the center spot and they weren't happy with the backup center production. So to go from Miles Turner to Thomas Bryant is a huge drop off, right? It's a steep drop off in terms of like starting center. So I think for them, like a more realistic path, I think would be a 3-team trade where a different center and probably a center of similar monetary value. So Nikola Vucevic, a Jakob Poeltl, I guess could be a Robert Williams if there's maybe like another player in that trade. But Clint Capella, like of the guys that the Lakers have been looking at as well, could one of those guys be rerouted to Indiana and then the Lakers get Turner and then Rui plus another asset gets sent to the third team? Now looking at those teams, Portland's tanking, so they don't really care. But the one thing is, like, if they flip Robert Williams for Rui, you're taking on additional money because Robert Williams is at about, I want to say like 12 and a half next year, whereas Rui's at 18. So you're taking on $5.5 million. So they're going to want something for taking on that extra $5.5 million. Vucevic, I believe, is expiring, or maybe he might have one more year left. Poeltl has one more year left. So those situations, they're actually taking a pay cut, I want to say. I forget if Vucevic is expiring or not. And then who's the other one? Capella is expiring. So Atlanta would be taking on some additional money in that potential 3-team trade. So I think if it does happen with the Lakers, because they don't have a center to trade for Turner, it would almost certainly have to be a 3-team trade where another center gets rerouted to Indiana and they don't take back Rui. Because you could argue, I've talked about it before, but you could argue, like, looking at Indiana's roster, like a big combo forward is like one of the few positions they don't need. They got Pascal Siakam, they got Obi Toppin, they're trying to get Jarris Walker more minutes and opportunity. That's why they've actually been trying to trade Obi Toppin. But you could even like Mathurin and Nesmith, like they got a bit of a logjam there at like the 3 and the 4. And I don't think Rui, like, I don't know where he slots in exactly. Like he's not the worst player in that group, but he's also not the best. I would say he's not even the second best, probably not even the third best, depending on like who you put in that wing big forward group. So I think that's where he doesn't really make sense for Indiana. Could you do Gabe Vincent and like multiple minimum guys like that all of a sudden you're creating a problem for Indiana. So I think it would have to be a 3-team trade is the one thing I've kind of settled on in talking to people, but no real updates as to like, I don't think they're trying to trade him as of right now, but it is something that they are weighing and monitoring. And if the right deal presents itself and they decide in the next week they don't want to give him that $30 million or so that he wants this summer, then I think he'll be available. And then it just comes down to fighting the best offer. Because I think there will also be a bidding war. I don't think the Lakers are the only team that's going to be interested in Miles Turner. Like there are not many 3-and-D centers in the league. I'm going to go about 10 minutes because my throat and nose are killing me right now, which is always a great sign. Angelco, Azorad Rezo, thank you for the super chat. Yo, Buha. The Lakers need to make sure their trade deadline moves are targeted for Gordon and MPJ, the two we need an answer for. This is a Denver specific question. And so I think with this, if you get another big man, it does help you in the Denver matchup just in general, because you could put 80 on Gordon or you could put AD on Jokic and have another big man roaming, or vice versa. I think that's probably your best thing. Like, I don't think you're going to get two forwards, because like if we're just calling it what it is, like you're gonna need LeBron to guard one of those two guys, and I mean, LeBron's going to be a starting front court guy, and if like in theory their playoff rotation, I know Westbrook's been starting recently and Gordon was out, but I think their starting lineup in the playoffs would be Jokic, Gordon, MPJ, Christian Brown, and Jamal Murray. So like, who's LeBron guarding in that group, right? Like Jokic is going to be, if you're adding a center and starting that center, that guy's probably going to guard Jokic. Then you're putting LeBron on Gordon or MPJ. I think if we're looking like this overall roster, I think DFS and Vando, like Vando being healthy and available potentially, and DFS being on this team now, those two guys help you match up. Certainly with MPJ more, but I would even say Gordon to a lesser extent. Like DFS is at a size disadvantage against Gordon, but he is someone who I think would bring that like fight and heart that like he will battle Gordon. I think he'll lose from a physical standpoint, but I think adding a Kessler, a Turner, a Pirtle, a Robert Williams, a Clint Capella, like that will help in this matchup. Battle Jokic, have AD roam, and then you're going to need a certain level of defensive awareness and I don't know what I just did to cause that. Awareness and focus and execution from LeBron. Because, I mean, LeBron, I guess, can guard Christian Brown, but he's a good cutter. He's a good offensive rebounder for like a guard, and he's a good shooter. So it's not like a cakewalk to. He's not a guy you could just like ignore, right? So LeBron, they're going to need LeBron to defend in this matchup, and I think you could argue, as crazy as this sounds, MPJ might be his best matchup because Gordon is a tough one, because if LeBron is not rotating back, Gordon's going to kill you with those offensive rebounds, those baseline cuts from the dunker spot for dump off passes, for lobs. I think it's really a tough matchup for LeBron defensively, because you either have a shooter who's running off screen, spotting up, and is a 6'10", 6'11", dead-eye sniper, especially against the Lakers, who has a really quick release, and it's tough to close out and contest on him. And then you have Gordon, who is one of the few guys in the league that like LeBron can't just like overpower at the forward spot. And I mean, he's actually taller and I think stronger than LeBron, or they're pretty close in strength, and just as athletic. Like Gordon's just a physical freak. So that's a guy that's given them a lot of problems. So I do agree with you. I just don't know how you really solve that. I think the 1-2 path, like the two paths are either you get another center and you just play bigger collectively, or you get another forward. But I don't see a forward currently available that kind of helps with this matchup specifically. Like I like Cam Johnson. Cam Johnson's not helping you against Aaron Gordon. Maybe he can hang a little bit with MPJ if like that's his sole defensive responsibility. But even then, that's asking a lot from him. And I would say in general, he's kind of like an average to below average defender. So I would say the issue here is like they just don't have great options to acquire upgrades on this. But I think removing Rui from this matchup by trading him, adding a center, and then also having DFS and Vando, those collective moves, I think will ultimately help them match up better with Denver. Also, Russ, I think that helps. Eeg, thank you for the super chat. Last one, rewind to draft night. Bronny had people talking crazy about LBJ and nepotism, but IRL standing O on the road for an and one. Every arena loves him. You ever notice from your line of work how different online discourse is from real life? Certainly. And I would point to that being an example. Like it's every crowd. And honestly, it's not even just Laker fans. Like Laker fans want to see Bronny, but like, I mean, Cleveland's of course a different, situation, but just like there's been Bronny chance in, I want to say what Lakers are 11-13 on the road. I believe it's got to be in like almost half of the arenas. And even then, like some of those games, Bronny wasn't present at because he was in the G League or because he was injured or sick. Like he's dealt with illnesses a couple times. So he hasn't even been at every road game. But like I would say over half of the road games he's been at, he's gotten some form of a Bronny chant. And that just shows you like the fandom of LeBron. And then obviously that trickling down to Bronny, but the fandom of Laker fans and just the fandom of basketball fans in general for this story and for this, narrative and just observing it and getting to see LeBron and Bronny play, not necessarily at the same time always because it's only happened, a couple times, but yeah, I mean, there's still like, I don't think it's all positive in terms of like the fan interactions. Like I'm sure people have said stuff in the crowd that like maybe we don't pick up on depending on where we're sitting, but for the most part, I think the fan experience has been like pro Bron. And then of course at home games, the fan base is always chanting for him and clamoring for Bronny to check in. So I think to your point, like the real life experience with Bronny has been much more positive than the online discourse. And that has been very toxic. And look, I've said it before, it's one of my least favorite subjects to talk about because it's so like, it feels like you're stepping on landmines no matter what you say, and you're either being too positive or too negative or whatever. But to your question specifically, I think that the real life interaction and positivity has been much more present than the online discourse. King Rifa _Chifa. Thank you for the super chat. Is it more likely Rob makes a Russ trade again or pulls off another 3-team Magic trick? Rui is only 25, but might be a casualty now that Vando's back. I don't see the Lakers doing another Russ trade. I mean, literally, obviously not for Russ, but like I think they've been afraid of making that type of big swing and making a mistake again. So I don't see Fox, DeRozan, Levine, Ingram. DeRozan, I don't even think is really available, but that's a name that's been thrown out there. Those types of quote unquote, like third star, all-star type, whatever. I don't see them doing that. I mean, they could be a giant smokescreen and maybe they try it again, but I think that they still have scars from the Russ trade. So I guess between the two, I would say a 3-team trade is more likely than a Russ trade. I would say just a straight up swap with another team is the most likely. And to your point, like they like Rui, and ultimately if they don't trade Rui, I think it's partly because of his contract and him being a polarizing figure around the league, but it's also partly because like they just like him. So, but I think if we're looking at it objectively with Vando and DFS, Rui is more expendable, and he has not been playing as well as he was earlier in the season. He did have a nice game tonight, and he's had a couple of nice games recently. He also played well against the Sixers, but like in general, he has not been the same player, especially defensively. So he is more expendable, but the question is like, what can they actually get for him? And I think the issue is more so like, I think they value him more than other teams do. And then that's where there's like a bit of a disconnect in terms of what they think his value is versus what other teams do. And then it's like, okay, if we're giving up a player we like and we got to attach all these additional assets, that's where I think they get a little concerned about pulling the trigger on a Rui trade. Next one from Stephanopoulos. Hey, Jovan. Thank you for the super chat. Hey, Jovan, have you heard any changes in the front office thinking with regards to their confidence in this team going forward? Deadline is coming fast. It's a good question. I don't think... I think they've kept a pretty level head in terms of like their own evaluation. I don't think there's been like wild swings in terms of like 1 week they're in, 1 week they're out. I think they've kind of had the same general viewpoint. Like the Lakers have been largely a top 6 team outside of a couple weeks where they dipped and were more of like a play in or I don't even think they ever got out of the top 10, but largely have been a top 6 team. So I think they've shown like this is a playoff team capable of winning a round. And I think that they've shown they're worth investing in. I think ultimately, um, the issue they're running into is just like a lot of these prices are high because it is more of a seller's market than a buyer's market. And they're running into issues. I don't know what's going on with these emojis. Okay. Happy birthday to whoever's birthday it is. But they're running into issues with the contracts. And like I've said it before, and I continue to kind of beat the drum. Like, if you want to trade Jared Vanderbilt, you got to attach a first round pick. If you want to trade Rui, you want to trade Gabe Vincent, you got to attach assets. Those are not viewed like Rui. Maybe some teams view him as like a neutral asset. No one views it as a positive asset. Gabe is viewed as a negative asset. And that's just the reality of the situation. Like, if those guys were expiring, it would be different. But to pay Gabe Vincent one more year, you don't know about his health. And you know, the shooting's been very up and down overall during his Lakers tenure. Rui is a guy that, depending on the night, looks like a starter or looks like a fringe rotation player. Vando has 3 more years, has an extensive injury history, and there still are a lot of questions about his playoff viability as an offensive piece in a playoff ecosystem. So like, those guys are they're tradable contracts, but they're not exactly like super tradable either. So I think they keep running into high asking prices, and they're trying to figure out what are they actually comfortable giving up. Now, I would argue, like I think LA Times reported that there might be like a 2 first round pick asking price for like Jakob Poeltl, which I think is just absolutely crazy. I think he's like a borderline like 1 first round pick, but 2 is just insane. So like, if that's really the market though, Lakers are kind of in a tough spot. Now, I think at some point you get to the point where it's like, you do have to either make a move or not, right? So the market is the market. And if the asking prices are high, you got to weigh the pros and cons of like, okay, well, we could sit on these picks, sit on these players, sit on these assets and not move them. But then what's the risk? What's the downside? And the downside, I think, is like, you're not quite at the ceiling level that you could be with this group. And you might only have 2 more shots at it. And you might just waste this first shot. Then you could try and go get something over the summer. But it's like, now you're putting all your eggs in the basket of LeBron, about to be 41, year 23, 80, about to be year 32, or year season 14, age 32. Like that's a lot on next season. I think that the shrewd move would be getting the best possible thing you could get with your assets at this trade deadline. And if you have to slightly overpay, if you know, you take a risk with Alonzo Ball or Robert Williams, a Bruce Brown, I think that the risk is worth it compared to like standing pat. And I think the Lakers, as constructed, can make some noise in the playoffs, but I don't think they're a championship team. I don't even know if they're a conference finals team. But I think the foundation's there to be those things if they make the right moves. And it's going to require some draft capital, and they have to be okay with parting with that. Just hit the 1 hour mark, so I'm going to go. I will answer this one, and then I'll answer a couple in the chat. Then I'll wrap up because I'm losing my voice here. Eeg, I lied. Thank you for the super chat again. I lied. Last one. I love DFS. I think it's a really good get. But if D'Lo expiring was the best contract, is it possible they jumped the gun there? What was the incentive of doing that so early? D'Lo attitude, maybe. I think they ultimately, I mean, I think part of what it was with the DFS situation was Memphis was making an aggressive push for DFS. And I think there was a sense that if they waited, they were going to lose out on him. And I think still up to this point, like obviously there haven't been many trades, but I think DFS is the best player that's been traded at the, you know, up to this point in trade season. And the Lakers got him. Now, I think there's 2 parts to this, because one is the contract of D'Lo and how valuable that was, and like, could you have done? I mean, see, I think Brooklyn only wanted expiring, so that's where some of this stuff's a little tricky. But like, you could have done Gabe and a couple of minimums, or you could have done Rui. But then you're not giving them an expiring in either one of those scenarios. So I think you probably, in that case, you probably have to give up a first round pick. And I don't think the Lakers wanted to do that in that scenario. Like maybe you could argue like Rui in a first would have, and keeping D'Lo's contract and the 3 seconds like could have ultimately been better value, and you would have had more flexibility. You would have had 5 seconds right now and D'Lo's contract. And if you're willing to put in the second first round pick with some combination of those seconds, maybe you're better positioned, arguably. But hindsight's 2020. I think if they could have put a different contract in, that they probably would have, or at least considered it. But D'Lo was the best contract for like salary matching purposes, and it does limit them right now. I think the other thing that I feel like people haven't talked about enough with this whole situation is like the second round picks they gave up. They gave up they had 5 second round picks. They gave up the 3 most valuable ones, and they kept the 2 least valuable ones. And obviously that's a negotiating thing between them and Brooklyn. But I think if they had one of those additional seconds and had given up one of the 2025 ones, that would also carry more weight. Cause I think I've talked about it again, several times, but like currently they have their second round pick and the Clippers second round pick. And those 2 picks are not like, those are projected to be late 40s, early 50s. And I think especially with second round picks, like teams like the mystery box element of like a lot of second round picks don't pan out obviously and end up like, unless you're getting a top 40 or, technically a top 10, like second round pick, most of those guys don't pan out, right? Like you get the diamond in the rough, but for the most part, go through second rounds and like see how bad a lot of those guys are. They don't last in the league. But there's like a mystery box element to it where you could kind of sell yourself on like, well, how good or bad are the Lakers going to be in 2027? Like that could be the 33rd pick. That could be the 39th pick. That could be the 42nd pick. And you could kind of like talk yourself into it. But when the Lakers are probably going to be a top 12 team and the Clippers are probably going to be a top 12 team record wise, you're kind of like, well, why do I want the 48th and like 51st pick in this draft? And it is a good draft, but it's like not, if you're fortunate, one of those guys will make your roster and like, it's unlikely both do. So I think there's just an element of like people looking at their seconds and being like, that's not really moving the needle for us. If you want to move the needle, give us a swap or give us a first. And then depending on the player, that's where the LA kind of has some pushback in terms of like not wanting to like they're in a kind of a tricky spot where if they had worse firsts or better seconds, I think they'd have a lot more flexibility, but they have 2 really good first round picks and 2 really bad seconds. And like the gap in value on the trade market with those 2 is like night and days, right? So it's like they either have to overpay with the firsts and give up first round picks or guys who probably aren't worth first round picks or maybe not worth the quality of first round picks the Lakers can offer, or they're offering these crappy second round picks that teams don't really want and it's not really getting them to bite. So they're in kind of a tricky spot there. And that's to say nothing of like attaching assets to offload a Rui or a Gabe or potentially a Vando. So I don't envy the front office in trying to navigate all this, but again, I just think when it comes down to it, you have a certain window with LeBron and AD. You have sat out multiple trade cycles, and what's the point of re-signing them, of going through this song and dance if you weren't going to give it like one real shot? And the DFS trade was a nice trade. I've said it so many times, but it wasn't like the big swing. And maybe there isn't a big swing, but you could at least take like another medium one and put at least one of those picks on the table, in my opinion. Another one from 7 Days Sports Pod. Thank you for the super chat. If the Lakers don't make a move, it will cost Rob his job if LeBron and AD want to leave. I'm hearing that Lakers won't trade AR for Fox. That is crazy. I can't speak to the first one. Like I've continued to only hear that Rob is safe, and I don't think his job is in jeopardy. Of course, like there are a lot of factors that go into that, and if it's the disaster scenario, they don't make a move and LeBron and AD ask out and it gets like really ugly, like, who knows what happens with that. But like, I think Rob is safe and I don't see that changing for the time being. In terms of the last point, we talked about it a little bit earlier. I think that there's multiple layers to that in terms of it's hard for LA to even match and offer a quality offer for Fox. I've heard that he already didn't have the Lakers at like the top of the list. He had a couple other teams. And I think if you're the Lakers, there's a political element here of like trading Austin, like saying you would trade Austin for Fox. If you end up with Fox and end up doing it, that's one thing. But if you don't, and I think the odds are against that happening, you're potentially alienating your third best player and a guy you are really high on. So I think there's lots of elements and layers within that. I could be wrong, and maybe they just don't think Fox is worth it, and maybe that's that I'd have a little bit of a different. I would also argue that like ideally you keep Austin and add Fox, and then you slot Austin as your number 4, and you have Fox and Austin as your backcourt. Just because from a talent perspective, of course Fox is a better player, and it is a notable upgrade from Austin. But if you're giving up Austin and Rui, let's just say, for Fox, like that is 2 rotation players for 1, and the Lakers are already a team that has depth issues, and they're a team that like you don't really feel great about like guys past the top 7 or 8. And if you're losing already one of those guys, or technically like, you're removing one because you're trading 2 for 1, there's a chance your closing lineup and your starting lineup are better. I'm not going to deny that. And certainly your ceiling could be higher. That's possible. But this is not like a team with all this depth that can kind of afford to lose rotation pieces. Like they don't really have depth. And I think that would be one concern. Like ideally, I would give up if I'm Lakers, I would give up everything outside of Austin to make this work. And really, if you could keep Max, I would give up Dalton. I would give up 2 firsts. I would give up the 3 pick swaps. I would give up 2 seconds. Like I would make an aggressive offer and be like, I want to keep LeBron, AD, Austin, Max, and you're probably keeping Vando, probably keeping Dorian, and then everything else is like fair game in terms of the trade, like Rui, Gabe, Dalton, and like something else, and then all those assets, and I just go all in with that. And then you start Fox, Austin, DFS, LeBron, AD, benches, Vando, Max, and then not much, but at least I really like that top 7. Okay, I've gone over, but I didn't get to the chat, so I'm back in the chat now. Leo Potente, is Malik Monk maybe on the market? I have not heard it. Doesn't mean it's not true, but I have not heard him. Poster King, what about Ayton? Big issue with Ayton. For me, there's a big issue with him defensively and just like the lack of seriousness. I think sometimes I feel like he's a guy who's kind of coasted like he had the great run with Phoenix to the finals, and then I feel like it's kind of been downhill. But the contract, he's making $30 million, and it's just it's hard to match that. Florida Aiders, Fox would cost $30 million more than AR. That's another point here. And like, again, I'm not saying that Fox is not better than AR and not like substantially better or notably better. Like I think De'Aaron Fox is arguably a top 20 player in the league. I do not have Austin close to the top 20. So like there's a clear gap between the two, but $30 million in how you build your roster is a substantial difference. And that's just something that you would have to factor in. But again, I think it's more so I would rather keep like you want to have as many like good players at the top of your roster. And even right now, the Lakers have like whoever you think is their 4th best player, you can make an argument for DFS, for Max, for Rui, like whoever you think is their 4th best player. The gap between Austin and that player is huge. And if you do the Fox trade, it's going to be an even bigger gap. And of course, like you're improving at that number 3 spot, but I still think the Lakers like spots 4 through 8 are just not necessarily on par with some of the other elite teams. And that's where if you can add Fox and keep Austin, now you're comparing Austin at number 4 to other teams at other number 4 options. And like, I really like Austin as a number 4, compared to a lot, especially compared to other teams. So that's where I am with that. See, we got a super chat from the notorious CRG. As two-way contracts, are Jemison, Traore, and Koloko only auditioning for next year, or can any of them do anything in the playoffs? I believe they are ineligible to play in the playoffs. To play them in the playoffs, you would have to sign them to an actual roster spot. So it is more auditioning for next year. They could technically be signed by another team in terms of like an official roster spot. And as you saw, like when Kyler Kelly got called up to Dallas from South Bay, the Lakers have been promoting that, or South Bay's been promoting that because it's a good look. Because it's like, and the Lakers have a really good track record with South Bay of getting call ups and like being a destination where if you want to get called up from the G League, South Bay is one of the teams that, I mean, I think they're the team that gets the most attention. That's even before Bronny was there. Like the South Bay gets a lot of attention, and they have a really good track record of call ups. And it's no surprise, like if you look at, I was really surprised Quincy Oliveri didn't get picked up anywhere else. But for the most part, when the Lakers cut a two-way guy, a lot of times those guys get, like you saw, Blake Hinson got swooped up immediately by Golden State. Cole Swider gets immediately swooped up by Miami. Jay Huff and Scottie Pippen Jr. gets swooped up by Memphis. Like Lakers have a really good track record of their two-way guys getting swooped up other places once they cut them. So I think for these guys, like they're playing for next year, but they're also potentially playing for this year. Like I think you can make a case that depending on what they do with the back end of the roster, if they dump someone at the deadline, you can make a case Koloko deserves a roster spot. And it would be nice to just have him as like your potential third center come playoff time. So, but in terms of, I'm pretty sure I should brush up on my two-way knowledge, but I'm pretty sure they can't play in the playoffs. Karl Baller, Jovan, in your eyes, how? Oh wait, that wasn't the question. I meant to click your other question, which was, what do you consider a fake good defender? This is actually interesting because there's a fake good defender that I'm going to be covering in the trade targets, which is Colin Sexton, and I feel like he's a guy who. Maybe dating back to like his college days and whatnot, like has this defensive reputation. But if you actually watch the film on Colin Sexton, he is not a good defender. And he kind of plays the part of a good defender where like he gets low in his stance. He moves his feet and arms around, and like he'll scramble and he'll rotate quickly. And like there are elements that like look good aesthetically, but like he closes out wildly. He has very ineffective closeouts. He gets beaten off the dribble a lot. He is undersized, so guys can overpower him, shoot over him, whatever. So I think that's a guy who like the average fan or you know, whatever, like might consider him an above average to good defender. And like he kind of has that reputation. Whereas I think if you actually watch Colin Sexton, like he's not a good defender. He's not like a sieve. He's not like an atrocious defender. He's not like a giant liability, but I would say he's, in my opinion, certainly like I would label him a below average defender. So that to me is like fake good defenders, in my opinion, tend to like, again, kind of look the part. Like you can kind of look the part if you get in stance, if you're moving your arms around, if you're shifting a lot, like if you're rotating and scrambling. But there's like the actual technique element to how do you close out? Do you foul guys? Do you always run past them? Or do you stop short and you can decelerate very effectively and contest? And like, how do you recover when a guy beats you? Like with Sexton, he gets beat a lot and then he doesn't recover well, or he tries to, they're playing drop coverage and it's his job to get over the screen and rear view contest, and he doesn't really do that. So I would say Sexton, especially because it's top of mind with the trade target stuff. Like I think he's a much better offensive player than Gabe Vincent, but I think not quite as big of a gap on the defensive end, but like a decent gap on the defensive end between those two. And then Carmichael, I'll give you, I'll answer the second one. In your eyes, how would it be if JJ used AD like Jokic? I think we saw it kind of earlier in the season. I just don't think AD has the passing of Jokic. Like Jokic is arguably the best passer in the league at a minimum, top 5, if not top 3. I mean, I think it's really like between him and LeBron, and I mean, Trey's up there. I'm sure I'm going to forget someone that's going to piss people. Like Luka's up there. Like there's a top 4 or 5 guys that are all kind of bunched together, but I think you could argue, you'd certainly make the case he's the best passing big man. Like Bill Walton's up there. Prime Sabonis, Arvydas Sabonis, not Domantas Sabonis, is up there. And there's other great passing bigs, but like Jokic is probably the best. Here is Ray reminding me to go to sleep. Ray is my my bedtime alarm. I appreciate you. Okay, well, I see people now saying AR and Rui as defenders. Throne of Lies. Who's a better defender, Vando or DFS? I think Vando. I think Vando, certainly a better playmaker and a better point of attack guy. I do think Vando is like still getting his footing. Like I think he hasn't looked as athletic and quick laterally as he normally does. But the crazy thing is he's still been getting rebounds and stealing and like being disruptive. So I feel like he's at like 60%, like maybe 70% at most of like what he normally is. And that guy's still a pretty good defender and like very disruptive out there. So I would say Vando. I do think like DFS is a different type of defender because I think he plays with, I think he like, it's kind of hard. Like, I think there's some subtleties within his defense of, I think he's a very smart positional defender. And he also has like a certain level of aggression and like confrontation defensively that I really like. Like he takes hard fouls, but he also, I just think like is in the right spots a lot. And he's versatile too, but he gambles less than Vando and Vando can gamble a lot. But he also has the length and athleticism to gamble and get away with it. But between the two, I think DFS is, I think Vando's a better defender, but I think DFS is a good defender. And like, it's a good problem to kind of have the comparison between those two. Zach Eisen, or Eason, how many new players do the Lakers have by this time next week? New players. I'd say 2, but I could see them maybe doing a smaller trade to like dump Christian Wood and then maybe have an open roster spot, and then it's either sign someone or, so I'll say 2 by trade. I could also see them opening a roster spot and maybe signing again Christian Koloko or signing a free agent. But I'll say 2. D'Lo strongest soldier with Vando looking really good in limited time. 4 steals tonight. Should he be the 6th man when LeBron does his early rest? I still think, I mean, so you're saying come in for LeBron. You can make that case. I think it's between him and DFS. Like ideally, I think DFS should start. I still think he brings, like, we're talking about the defensive end. Offensively, DFS is a much better offensive player than Vando, and like they're in different. They're in different stratospheres as like shooters and like off ball threats. So I still think DFS brings the 2-way. Like if we're looking at if there's like a Venn diagram of Rui and Vando, DFS is the guy in the middle. He has the ability to shoot like Rui and attack closeouts and like give you double-digit scoring performances consistently. But then he also has the defense of Vando. Of Rui. Then he also has the defense of Vando, not at the same level, but still a plus defender. That's where I think DFS gives you that 2-way balance that you need with higher minutes guys. So I guess I would start DFS, have Vando be the DFS backup and have Rui be the LeBron backup. So I think you probably want Rui or LeBron, stagger those two, have one of them on the floor. So I'd actually pull LeBron for Rui and then shortly after pull DFS for Vando. And I like those combinations a little bit more. And then keeping one defender, one more offensive minded guy. And then you just keep the balance with those lineups. Okay. And then I see we got a super chat here from Braden. Great win. Hope you're okay during this long road trip. Jovan, get some rest. I think that is a perfect place to stop. I don't think I missed any super chats. No, I got them all. Appreciate you all. I of course, in typical Jovan fashion, went almost 30 minutes over by proposed stop time, but it's because I love doing this with you all and answering all your questions. So with all that said, I'm going to wrap here. I appreciate you all for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back tomorrow with my top 10 trade targets. Again, going through the strengths and weaknesses of each player, their contract situation, how I think they would fit, what I think a realistic offer would be or should be, and ranking them 1 to 10. So be on the lookout for that new episode of Buha's Block. I will talk to you then, and then be back over the weekend for the Lakers next game, coming live from New York after that one. So a lot of good stuff coming over the next couple of days. We will continue to monitor and track the Lakers and the trade deadline and everything that's going on with that. So an exciting week. We have officially hit less than a week until the trade deadline. As I just said, I think there'll be a couple new Lakers. We'll see. But I think they're going to do something. I'm just not quite sure yet what the scale or magnitude will be. But that will do it for this stream. And I will talk to you all soon. Shout out to the Late Night Gang.